floor to the distinguished representative of the United States.
Thank you, Madam President, and thank you, members of the General Assembly. Every year since 1992, we have gathered here in this body for what can only be described as political theater, in which the Cuban regime tries to convince itself, tries to convince its international supporters, and tries to convince the Cuban people that the world holds it blameless for its attacks on the fundamental freedoms of its citizens and for the abysmal, despicable economic consequences of its policies. Some of you, many of you, frankly, some as recently as this morning, tell us privately that since the regime cares so much about this vote, that you just want to appease it. You just want to kind of go with the flow and go with the crowd. That's what you tell us privately. But, colleagues, let me suggest today that you do something different this year. The United States and the Trump administration wants to set the record straight when it comes to this resolution and to correct the fake news, the misinformation, and this false reality the regime seeks to create year after year with this vote. The facts are this is an illegitimate and brutal regime that seeks to cast itself as the victim of aggression while plainly describing itself as, quote, the enemy of the United States. It's located just 90 miles off our shore. It conspires and it collaborates with enemies and adversaries of the United States against our interests. The facts are that this regime supports terrorist organizations around the globe. It is allowing mercenaries to fight in the war in Ukraine. It's propping up the Venezuelan regime, and it aids cartels. The facts are that these cartels that it props up are trafficking people, drugs, and weapons, and is aiding and abetting instability in our hemisphere. They undermine democracies in our hemisphere.
I'm very sorry to interrupt, but there's a point of order from Cuba.
Sure. Madam President,
yes. Yes, we have to give the floor to the point of order and the representative of Cuba.
Artículos 71 y 60.
In 61 and 68 of the rules, the permanent representative of the United States is not only lying, substantively deviating from the subject, but is also grossly and expressing against his president, against the dignity of the Assembly and the member states. He is doing so in an uncivilized, crude, and gross way that is not acceptable in this democratic forum. Mr. Waltz, this is the United Nations General Assembly. It is not a signal chat, nor is it the House of Representatives.
I ask the distinguished representative of the United States to continue.
Thank you, Madam President. I'm well aware of the location of which we're speaking, and this is also not a communist, illegitimate legislature in Havana. This is a place where we talk in facts, and the facts are the Cuban regime has undermined democracies in our hemisphere. It has oppressed its own people, and it steals from its own people so that, quote, regime insiders can maintain their elite status. I don't need to say that on any type of chat. I'm saying that in front of the entire world, and it is well known within the Western Hemisphere for those who closely pay attention. So I would suggest that our member states stop appeasing the regime with their votes and instead use this vote to send the world a message. I would encourage you to send the regime in Havana a message and send the Cuban people a message. Stop using this vote to blame them and blame all of its economic problems on the United States. No government in history has ever made a communist economy work. Even fellow socialist and communist states are urging Cuba to open its economy to its own people, allow its people to thrive, and the only thing equal about communism and socialism is that everyone is equally miserable and poor. And so just to correct the record, and colleagues, please hear me on this term blockade, on this term embargo, the United States has always allowed Cuba to import food, to import medicine, and to import humanitarian goods. In fact, last year in 2024, the United States exported. I've seen the ships leave the ports in Florida and in Louisiana. It exported $500 million of goods to Cuba, over $585 million of food, of humanitarian aid, of medicine. Colleagues, how is that a blockade? I just heard a colleague here before me describe this as a blockade. $500 million, and in fact, the Cuban regime can trade with any of you, with the entire world, with the rest of the Western Hemisphere, with our friends in Canada and elsewhere. There's no blockade. A blockade would be preventing anything from coming to Cuba. So please stop repeating this propaganda that allows the regime to then go back and have an excuse for its own failures. Let's stop spending these citizens' meager resources on high-end tourist hotels that sit empty while the people are starving. Tell the regime you've seen the investigative reporting about Cuba's military-controlled companies sitting on billions of dollars in offshore and overseas bank accounts, again, while its own people's needs are ignored. Please share with the regime its governance failures that have driven out 2 million Cubans have left Cuba, not coming in, they are leaving, and remind the regime to start prioritizing the needs of its own people. But most of all, it's time the regime is to be held accountable for its own human rights record, for its forced labor to make charcoal and cigars, for the 700 political prisoners that it continues to hold unjustly in prisons under horrific conditions and the constant threat of abuse and torture, the people that are rising up due to the oppression, that are arrested and treated brutally, and let's hold it accountable for participating in the human trafficking of medical professionals abroad that provides a source of cash for the regime. So, colleagues, you can send this message in a very easy way. Abstain from this vote or vote no with the United States. We enthusiastically welcome your support, and we enthusiastically and strongly encourage you to stop propagating this propaganda. There is no blockade. That is absolutely false. Let's send a message today, colleagues, in keeping, as the Cuban delegation has just said, in keeping with the history of this body, in line with human rights, in line with human dignity, and in line with a better future for the Cuban people. I thank you, Madam President.
Hello, good afternoon. It is your host, Emmanuel Isaiah Smith, and today's date is Saturday, November 1st, 2025. The time is 3:35 p.m., and I am in Doral, Florida. The topic of today's lecture is candor. The brilliant playwright and poet William Shakespeare said in the 17th century, if I'm not mistaken, that brevity is the soul of wit. I happen to believe that candor is the soul of wit. I don't know anybody on planet Earth, really, that doesn't like candor. People like candid discussions. They like candid information. And they like honesty in discourse. They like integrity in discourse. Now, you may have noticed on my lecture for today, and mind you, I do these videos in a lecture format because, having experienced gang stalking in various capacities over the past 30 years, I have the equivalent of 4 PhDs in the subject. Each PhD with respect to a separate and identifiable designation of gang stalking. And furthermore, I've always had a sense of closeness to academia, to the academic world. And I myself have always enjoyed a good lecture, despite the topic. So I myself, in turn, give my listeners lectures on clandestine gang stalking and related topics. Now, ladies and gentlemen, you'll notice that my commentary on gang stalking is candid. I use candor. Candor is my friend. Candor is your friend. Candor is the friend of humanity. To be candid with somebody is to be ethical with them. It is to be a person's comrade, to be candid with them. Whether the news presented is good, bad, or ugly, being candid is ultimately the best way to go. And mind you, ladies and gentlemen, I do these lectures outdoors, so I may have to project or raise my voice from time to time to drown out the background noise. Please adjust your volume accordingly. To be candid with a person is to ensure that they get the information, and not just any information, but the right information. And that's on any subject. Because your listener is subject to your opinion. They're subject to your ethos, which is your credibility, and they're subject to the rhetoric that you're bringing. So I always bring rhetoric that is clear, concise, precise, candid, relevant, timely, and pertinent to the topic that I cover, which is clandestine gang stalking. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I live in an international region, okay? I live in South Florida and have for the past 8 years now. And I've done a little bit of touring in that 8 years to get a better sense of my surroundings. I've visited I reside in Miami, but I visited pretty much every city in Miami. Pinecrest, Kendall, Little Havana, Little Haiti, Miami Beach, the city of Miami, Doral, Coral Gables, Aventura, Sunny Isles Beach, North Miami Beach, North Miami, West Miami, El Portal. Okay, I visited Fort Lauderdale, Coconut Grove, West Palm Beach, Jupiter, Florida, Jupiter Island. Okay, Port St. Lucie. All right, Varo Beach, Satellite Beach. All right, I visited pretty much every destination that there is to visit in South Florida. Now, mind you, ladies and gentlemen, I started my project 10 years ago when I was living in Dayton, Ohio, because I saw an uptick in synchronized behavior from the people around me. I saw an uptick in disruptive behavior from the people around me. I saw multiple vandalisms and burglaries to my townhome. I saw multiple vandalisms and burglaries to my vehicle. Okay, I began documenting gang stalking around that time. And I took a road trip up and down the East Coast. And I visited Washington, D.C., Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, New York City. I went back to Cleveland for a couple of days. I went to, and then I started moving my way towards the Midwest. I visited Chicago for about a month. Then I visited Wisconsin for a day. Then I came back down around and went to Arlington, Virginia. And then I made my way around and resurfaced in Dayton, Ohio. And I experienced the same synchronous activity in all of these places. And then I decided to move to South Florida because of the climate. Okay, this warm year-round climate gives me the opportunity to observe gang stalking outdoors more intimately than I would if I lived in a place where I was only able to be outside this often for 3 or 4 months, which is most of the Midwest. So me coming to South Florida was a way for me to be able to investigate gang stalking a little deeper, a little more intimately, and a little more often, given the warm year-round climate. I can go about my day outside more, and I can observe the people around me more and gain further insights into this mechanism called clandestine gang stalking. So, in the spirit of candor, we're going to get some things out on the table. You just heard some street theater there. The loud pipes are made to resemble gunfire. I don't know if these schmucks are trying to intimidate me or what, but quite frankly, they can run those motorcycles right into the ocean with the motorcycle and sink to the bottom for all I care, ladies and gentlemen. Let's talk a little bit about the geographic situation here in South Florida. So, in the spirit of candor, we're going to get some things out on the table. So, in this county that I live in, it is 85% Cuban, if I'm not mistaken. I believe that there are a number of persons in the Cuban community here who have made false complaints against me to TikTok and to Facebook and to YouTube in an attempt to sabotage my project Not because what I'm saying is not true, but because what I'm saying is true. That's their problem. They don't like the fact, and I'm talking about these complainers, they don't like the fact that a man has all but exposed their entire programmatic unit and put my findings on the internet for the whole world to see. Of course, they're ashamed and embarrassed about that. As I've said in previous lectures, gang stalking presents itself as invincible, as invulnerable. It gives its participants the opportunity to commit crimes and commit other acts of thuggery against other citizens without recourse. So, a lot of gang stalkers thought that this program would run forever. You know, they say that the Reich Chancellor of Nazi Germany, Adolf Hitler, had a vision of a 1,000-year Reich that would be headquartered in Munich, Germany, in which the whole world would be subject to the political whims of Hitler himself. Kind of like Caesar Augustus or Tiberius Caesar or Emperor Nero, who were emperors of Rome in the medieval times. He wanted that kind of power, the same kind of power that the Roman emperors had, where the entire world was influenced by his decisions and his ideas of how the world should be. Obviously, that 1,000-year Reich plan came to a halt when Joseph Stalin's Soviet army obliterated Adolf Hitler's army on the Eastern Front. That was the end of Hitler's ambition right there. However, Hitler enthusiasts, or people who are fans of Adolf Hitler, still dream of that 1,000-year Reich, where those who were loyal to Hitler's commands would be able to do anything to anybody, anytime, with no punishment, with no recourse, with no consequence. That 1,000-year Reich blueprint was copied and pasted right off of Adolf Hitler's political manifestos and right onto a blueprint that we know today to be clandestine gang stalking. This program is supposed to run for the next 1,000 years. It was never supposed to be exposed. It was never supposed to be caught. It was never supposed to be defeated. It was never supposed to be slain. It was never supposed to be vanquished. But it has been. Thanks to the internet, thanks to industrious leakers who leaked the top secret information concerning gang stalking onto the internet, and thanks to persons like myself and others who see it fit to document our ideas and experiences with clandestine gang stalking and make them available for the entire world to see 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year at no cost to you. What I do is a public service. What I do is a hobby. What I do is my passion. and that's communicating political ideas to an audience on a daily basis. Let's talk about candor, ladies and gentlemen. There's presently an investigation underway right this very minute as to whether or not the Cuban state is a state sponsor of terrorist activities. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I'm a man that understands history. I'm a man that understands narratives. I'm a man that understands historical narratives. I'm a man that understands geopolitics. I'm a man that understands the trajectory of political history worldwide from medieval times to the present day. I'm a man that enjoys political debate. I'm a man that enjoys political discussion. And the situation with Cuba right now is an unbelievable situation, and it deserves a historical analysis so that it makes sense. So that it makes sense to the American taxpayer who's being affected by this. If there are terror cells here in South Florida, the American people need to know about it, especially if the Cuban government has a hand in the creation or the financing of those terror cells. Now, let me tell you something right now, ladies and gentlemen. Okay? I have an immense amount of respect for various cultures, languages, and people. I've studied the Hebrew Bible and the Hebrew culture, and I've studied how that culture has progressed and how it led to the Jewish diaspora post World War II. And the trajectory of the Jewish people from World War II to the present day. Okay? It's a beautiful history. It's a lovely history. And it must be included in the grand scheme of things because I've studied the Arabic language as well. I studied Arabic in college. And when you study a language, you learn a lot about its people. You learn a lot about the heritage. You learn a lot about the culture of a people when you study their language. And when I took Arabic at Wright State University, I learned a great deal about the Arab world. And I am not anti-Arab at all, any more than I'm just as precisely as I'm not anti-Hebrew or anything like that. My name is Hebrew. I was raised in the Christian cultural tradition, so all of these matters appeal to me very deeply. And that includes the situation in the Middle East, where on October 7th of last year, you had a massacre that was perpetrated against the Jewish people by Hamas. And then after that, you had a retaliatory string of attacks from the Israeli state against the Gazans that some in the United Nations have determined are genocidal in nature. Okay? That is a very complex situation there. Does a massacre warrant a response? Absolutely. Does a massacre warrant the kind of response that Israel has leveled against the Gazans and the Palestinians? That's a matter of public debate. That war is very intimate. That is a war between Palestine and Israel. That war has raged on for 77 years now. And there are some people who believe that what Israel's doing is an atrocity and a crime against humanity. And there are others who believe that what they're doing is a proper response. Me personally, I don't live in the region. So it's difficult for me to sit here and say what's happening is wrong or what's happening is right. But ultimately, there's been a lack of intervention into that conflict from the rest of the world. Okay? And when I look at that situation, it brings back memories of Roman conquest in the Middle East, in North Africa, in Western Europe, in the Mediterranean. The Romans had highly trained militaries. And if a Roman legion invaded your territory, you had two options as a government. You had to allow them to purchase your soldiers and absorb your country into the Roman Empire, or you could decline that request and fight the Romans, which at that time was not a great idea because they had so many soldiers, not only from Europe, but from the Middle East as well. Because mind you, that was how the Romans acquired armies. That was how they acquired so many civilizations and territories. They would invade your country. They would go directly to the king or the emperor or the monarch. They would purchase the king's army with money and absorb the army into the Roman army and essentially mark your territory as conquered. And if you resisted that, you had to fight them, and you would typically lose. Now, ladies and gentlemen, gang stalking is not much different than this. Gang stalkers like to look at themselves as conquerors. You know, their whole thing is, well, look at what we did. We conquered the United States. We have this social engineering mechanism, and we can make men, women, and children of all races and walks of life bow at our feet. And we don't even have to purchase them as the Romans used to do. We don't have to subdue them militarily. All we have to do is show them why our way is the best way, and that anything else is futility and progression. I would like to lay down a number of precise points that I think are of interest to my listeners. And mind you, these points that you're hearing, okay, they're mine. Now, there are a number of deleterious third parties that I've mentioned in previous discourses, typically from Shaker Heights, Ohio, Dayton, Ohio, and Miami-Dade County, that have seen it fit to try and mimic my work or copy my work, or someone, I think, incorporated a company called EIS Media Group and put themselves as the chief executive officer in an attempt to mock me, because that's the name of my company, EIS Media Group, and I'm the chief executive officer of EIS Media Group. EIS Media Group is an unincorporated business entity that I am the founder, sole proprietor, president, and CEO of. So anything else you hear is essentially the whimsical noise of imposters. Furthermore, there are persons that listen to me live through bugging equipment, not out of a sense of, not because they, and I'm not talking about those who have sworn an oath of service to their country or their state. I don't mind them listening because they're going to hear the truth. But I'm talking about the third parties, people who are unsworn and have no sense of duty to God, country, or their people, using bugging equipment and signaling mechanisms to follow me around so they can hear my lectures live. Now, what they're doing is they're going to third parties after I finish my lecture, and they're telling these third parties, I know what his next lecture is going to be about. And they'll say, well, how do you know? And they'll say something goofy like, well, because I wrote it for him, or because I gave him a template on what to use. And these same jokers do that with my designs. As you see on my various web pages, I do graphic design as well. And all of my graphic design work is done by me and only me. And some of these same yokels, the ones who try to act as if they're feeding me ideas, are also hacking my tablet while I do designs and watching me do them live. And they're using some sort of mechanism to try and make it look to other people who are tuned in that they're the one doing the design and not me. Well, you got to be a real loser to try and steal credit for someone else's work. Furthermore, they're ripping off ideas. They see my designs online, they don't know how to do them themselves, so they hack my tablet and watch me do designs live so they can get ideas on how to do their own designs using my concepts. Like I said, you have to be a real loser to rip off somebody's ideas. Now, as I have said with surveillance, I don't mind third parties accessing my personal or business data, and that includes live designs if you are a professional who has sworn an oath of service to your state or your country. If you have, you're more than welcome to watch what I do online because you are going to see the truth. But those other third parties, the ones that are trying to rip off ideas and essentially find ways to sabotage my project by ripping off my material and also filing false complaints about me to social media giants to try and get me off the air. Like I said, it takes a real loser to rip off somebody else's work. Ladies and gentlemen, race, as I found it, has very little to do with who's a gang stalker, period. I've lived in Cleveland, Ohio, Dayton, Ohio, Kettering, Ohio, Knoxville, Tennessee, Broward County, Florida, and Miami Beach, Florida. And I have encountered gang stalkers from every race of person imaginable. And it's easy to tell them apart from non-stalkers because gang stalkers move to the tune of someone else. And it's not difficult to see who's moving to their own tune and who's moving to someone else's tune. Those someone else's are liaisons and undercover operatives who are giving them signals as to my whereabouts so they can approach me, the stalkers, and descend upon me with these hostile, annoying, confrontation-like type of situations. Now, mind you, ladies and gentlemen, I don't believe for a second that every Department of Defense member, every Department of Justice member, okay, every undercover operative in the country, all right, are gang stalkers. I think that most of the Department of Defense, most of the Department of Justice, and most undercover operatives are not gang stalkers. But I will tell you this. There is an increasing number of Department of Defense staff, Department of Justice staff, and undercover operatives that are learning what gang stalking is and how it works. Some of it is through online research. Some of it is them being plugged into the mechanism themselves. And some is by watching other people do gang stalking. And I don't doubt for a second that there are not Department of Defense staffers, Department of Justice staffers, undercover operatives, and law enforcers, teachers, EMS workers, firefighters, etc., that are not targeted persons themselves. Okay, I have no doubt in my mind that there are public employees that are targeted individuals themselves. They just don't know what to look for. They don't know how to quantify what's happening to them. Okay, that car darts in front of your squad car when you're on patrol. You think it's just a reckless driver. Maybe you pull him over, maybe you don't. But how about the idea that that car that darted in front of your squad car right at the last second was a gang stalker? Someone who took a signal to make that maneuver in front of you simply to disrupt your path forward. Okay, yes, I believe wholeheartedly that there are public employees that are themselves targeted individuals. They just don't know the signs. So hopefully my project can be a source of information to them and others. Ladies and gentlemen, it has come to my attention that there are some concerns about who becomes a target and who doesn't become a target, and what race becomes a target and what race doesn't become a target. I've lived in Ohio, Tennessee, and Florida, and I've experienced gang stalking by every color of the racial rainbow that exists. Okay, across the demographic spectrum. And it's impossible to blame anybody. It's impossible to blame the Republican Party. It's impossible to blame the Democrat Party. It's impossible to blame the independents or the third parties. For all we know, there are elected officials in these parties that are targeted individuals themselves. Yes, I believe that there are politicians that are targeted individuals themselves. There is absolutely no limit or any type of restriction as to who could become a targeted individual. The President of the United States could be a targeted individual for all we know. Look at all of the action this man has seen since going into the public sphere. We don't know what his life was like much when he was simply a business mogul. Okay, investing in real estate, high rises, country clubs, casinos, all right, jewelry stores, designer clothing lines, the Miss Universe pageant, boxing promotions, movies, books. But as soon as he stepped into the public life, all these bizarre things started happening with him. I mean, look at his presidency. He has the most eventful presidency of any president, probably since Abraham Lincoln. Because President Trump survived his assassination attempt and kept going, and that's admirable. I would like to speak for a second as well on matters related to where I am now. So as I said before, this is a very international place. It's mostly Hispanic here, but there's a sizable Haitian community, a sizable Jamaican community, a sizable Russian and Slavic community, a sizable Jewish community, a sizable Arab community. All right, African Americans and Caucasians are less abundant here than they used to be. But this is a very interracial county and part of the world. South Florida. Everything is upscale here. And the history of South Florida is it's a staggering look into diaspora. You know, there are some elected officials that are stunned at how fast the Cuban population of South Florida grew since the 1980s. And especially given that many of the first immigrants came here undocumented. And some of these same elected officials have expressed concerns that a lot of the Cuban population here are not using their real names. And they're using falsified credentials to get jobs that pay much more than the kinds of jobs that they would normally qualify for, which allows them a higher standard of living than they would have if they'd not used false names and false credentials. As I've said, in Candor, Florida, I do citizen patrol as a hobby, as a way of giving back to Miami-Dade County and its sheriff's department, and it allows me an up close and personal look at the various signaling mechanisms that are used in Candor, Florida, among the populace, but particularly among a number of persons that I've found to be deleterious persons that hang out in Olympic Park there. That's where I patrol, Olympic Park. And a lot of those guys back there all use the same phony names. If one of those guys gets pulled over or stopped by the police, they give the police a fake name. If another person gets stopped by the police, they give the police the same fake name the previous guy gave. If the other guy gets pulled over by the police or stopped or searched and they ask him for ID or his name, he gives the police the same fake name that the other two gave him. Then if the police grab the next guy and ask him for an ID so they could run his information and make sure he doesn't have a warrant, he gives them the same fake name that the previous three gave him. You see, they pass around fake names that everyone can use so that the police can never catch who it is they're looking for. It's kind of like this theory that I have on Satan, right? Because I talk some about religion. I talk some about theology. Right? I have my own ideas of how the supernatural operates based on my readings of religious manuscripts and philosophical texts. Okay? Also, my own experiences here on this earth have led me to believe some things. It's just like Satan. I believe that Satan, when he was cast out of the garden, cloned himself hundreds of millions of times. Somewhere in the galaxy, somewhere in the universe, so that in the day of judgment, Almighty God would not know which Satan was the real Satan. So that Yahweh, the creator of all things, would not know which Satan to throw into the lake of fire. Because you know, in the book of Revelation, it says that that's Satan's final destination. Because of his deceiving of the highly intelligent primates here on the earth called humans. Trying to make it so that their souls all are doomed to be bored in an afterlife that is less than heavenly. Satan cloned himself hundreds of millions of times so that in the last day, God would not know which Satan to throw into the lake of fire. This is Satan's own insurance policy that he gets to live forever. Just as his creator lives forever, and just as all people live forever, just in varied capacities in the afterlife. The trajectory of the gang stalking units that parade through the streets of South Florida with impunity, going 100 miles an hour down a 40 mile an hour speedway. Some of them run people over at this speed and keep going. Some people crash into bus stops at 130 miles an hour. And smash into everyone at the bus stop, destroying the bus stop and everyone standing there. And they get in their car and keep driving. No man, woman, or child that walks the sidewalks or the crosswalks of South Florida is safe. You have to take your safety into your own hands here. Now, I've talked some about synchronized vehicular obstruction of movement and what it is and why it's important in a clandestine gang stalking campaign. This is when a vehicular motorist takes signals as to who to cut off when they're driving. It's very reckless, it's very dangerous. And it's potentially homicidal. But they do it anyway for social credit. What is social credit in gang stalking? It's when you get credit for doing something that someone already plugged into your gang stalking campaign asks you to do. If I signal you in a vehicle to smash into this kid riding a bike this 8-year-old kid riding a bike and fling him 30 feet into the air to where he looks like a football flying through the air towards a field goal, you do that, you're going to earn social credit. Because the stalker who signaled you to run that kid over has documented the signal. They've documented your car. They've documented your license plate. So when they signal you, and mind you, these signals are clandestine. Okay? Sometimes pedestrians send motorist signals. So a pedestrian could send a motorist a signal as well, to run somebody over or to dart in front of them, that kind of thing. If you do what that stalker tells you to do, even if it results into a child being flung into the air like a golf ball that you whacked with a specialized driver, you fling them into the air like a frisbee, right? And that's the end of them. They're either paralyzed or dead. You get social credit as a gang stalker. Oh, that's right, ladies and gentlemen. You get social credit as a gang stalker for committing atrocious acts against people. And the more atrocious the act, the more social credit you get, because the stalkers know you're committed. The more dirt you do, the more committed you are to our cause. And yes, gang stalkers are a fraternity. They're a fraternity of knuckle-headed buffoons that use a signaling mechanism to terrorize the general public and to cheat in school and in the workplace. Let's talk about fear narratives. Gang stalkers use a lot of fear narratives. Oh, Emmanuel's scaring me. When I see him post stuff about gang stalking and the way he talks, I feel threatened. When he talks about capital punishment, that's a death threat to me. When he talks about synchronized vehicular maneuvering, that's a threat to me. When he talks about wanting to see these aloof, knuckle-headed third-party hacker types prosecuted, well, that sounds threatening because he sounds mad when he says it. I'm scared for my life. I'm scared for my family. Emmanuel Smith's project is scary. Every time I look into it, there's something in there about me. My response to that is, why are you telling on yourself, knucklehead? If what I say scares you, that means you probably participate in what I'm talking about. If you didn't participate in what I'm talking about, then my words wouldn't frighten you. As a matter of fact, you'd enjoy my lectures because you would learn something new, something that you would be able to draw from if you ever experienced gang stalking yourself. You know, it's funny, the ones that like to cause the most trouble behind the scenes are the ones that act the most frightened when they get caught. You ever seen that? It happens with murder suspects too. I was watching a court case of a situation that happened in, if I'm not mistaken, it was Clay County, Michigan, or possibly Clayton County, Michigan. The judge was Mark Trusick. And I actually enjoy watching Mark Trusick's courtroom proceedings because he has an identifiable approach to the mediation of courtroom proceedings and the administration of justice. There was a kid that was committing all these horrible crimes around town, and I'd say he was about 30 years old. And he was doing it so secretly it was difficult for people to find out it was him. But ultimately, he committed the ultimate crime. This probably happened sometime in 2015. So about 10 years ago this happened. Sometimes I watch older court cases to get perspective on the criminal justice system. So I was following this court case, and this kid, he finally committed the ultimate crime. He went and found a guy that was very beloved in his town, and he stabbed him to death. And he went through hell and high water to cover his tracks. He didn't want to get caught. He probably covered his tracks to a degree that is much more stringent than the average murderer. But despite that, he still got caught. And one thing about Judge Trusick that I found interesting, and I find this interesting about a lot of judges, some judges don't do life in prison. They just sentence you to an exorbitantly high number of years in prison. So for example, he sentenced this kid to 100 years in prison. Rather than life in prison without parole, he sentenced him to 100 years. Those kind of court cases are always interesting to watch, because the look on the murderer's face when the judge says, "Oh, I'm going to give you 125 years in prison for this crime, sir." Or, "I'm going to give you 110 years for this crime, ma'am." Or, "Sir, for this heinous act you've committed, I am hereby sentencing you to 350 years in prison." Okay, the look on the defendant's face when they get sentenced to that kind of time is interesting, and it's entertaining. It's amusing. And I haven't seen a Judge Trusick case in a while, but he did that to this kid, and deservedly so. This kid murdered a very beloved man in his community. And Trusick, in his sentencing, said to the kid, "Hey, you know what? This guy you murdered was the sweetest man in the world. He was loved by his community. He volunteered in various capacities. He was good to his family. He was good to his neighbors. He earned a reputation as somebody in his community that you could rely on. He spread joy and cheer to everyone he could. And what did you do? You went out, you got a knife, and you stabbed him." And he said, "I'm sentencing you to 100 years in prison this day. And you'll be eligible for release when you're 130 years old." And I thought that was a good end to that legal proceeding. And it also goes to show that the people who cover their tracks the most, the ones who like the most behind the scenes action, the ones who like to cover their tracks the deepest and make themselves the most difficult to find, they always suffer the most when they're finally caught and dealt with. And I think that's a good thing. Okay? There was another Judge Trussick case that was similar. And mind you, gang stalking is not that much different than that. Gang stalkers, the ones that like to cover their track the most, get the most embarrassed when you expose them. But we'll get into that in a second. Okay, there was another Trussick case that I followed that happened back in 2014. This one was concerning a guy named Nelson Ortiz Nieves murdering his 10-year-old stepson. Now, we've all heard the expression, I'm gonna beat you like a red-headed stepchild, right? We've all heard that expression. What does that mean exactly? Well, unfortunately, in various cultures around the world, stepchildren are not always treated appropriately by their step-parents. Why? Well, because the stepchild in the relationship is a constant reminder to their non-biological parent that, hey, my wife had this child with another guy. I don't like that image in my head. I'm gonna treat this child like garbage. And you'd be surprised how simplistic the thinking is there. And same with women. Women who go into relationships or marry men who have children that are present in the marriage, they have the same feelings. This child is a representation and a constant reminder of relations that my husband had with his former wife. I'm going to treat this child like a piece of trash because I don't like his ex-wife and I don't like her DNA being in my home in the form of this child. And sometimes stepchildren are treated awfully by their step-parents, particularly the one who's not related to them, because it's a constant reminder of a previous intimate relationship with another person. And that's how some people look at stepchildren, and sometimes they're beaten or harmed, or in this case, killed by their step-parents because they don't like what that stepchild represents with respect to a former partner that their present husband or wife had. So, this guy, this was also in Michigan, made his 10-year-old stepson take cold showers. Sometimes he used to punch him in the stomach real hard. I think he ruptured his colon one time with an uppercut to a 10-year-old boy's stomach. And there were other things too, like he would allow his kids to jump on this kid and beat him up and stuff like that, just so he could feel like his genes and his DNA are superior to the DNA of this boy who's the offspring of his girlfriend and her previous boyfriend. So eventually, this guy, Ortiz Nieves, beat this kid to death with a belt buckle. And he was caught. The kids told on him. And at sentencing, Judge Trussick, he told the guy, he said, you're an animal. You're disgraceful. You are a monster. You are evil. And this is the most disgusting trial that I have ever seen in 31 years on the bench. And then the guy started going crazy and they had to remove him from the courtroom. Then they brought him back into the courtroom and Judge Trussick sentenced him to life in prison without the possibility of parole. in front of his wailing cousins and so forth. And it was funny. It was funny. I actually watched that sentencing a few times because of how the guy was acting. The sentencing was funny and it was amusing. The defendant was acting like a total jerk during the sentencing. I mean, that's how you know somebody is a jerk. When they kill somebody and then during their sentencing they start jumping around trying to get loose, that's how you know that person is a prick. So that was an amusing sentencing for me just because of what the guy did to the kid. So with gang stalkers, it's not that much different. A lot of them forget that they're mortal, finite creatures that are bound to a legal standard just like anyone else. That's why when I see DUI cases reported, or I see people go to jail for any number of crimes, I try and look at their past criminal history, if they have one, to see what other kind of crimes they may have committed. Because gang stalkers have sort of a criminal protocol that they follow with respect to the kinds of crimes they commit. Like, I mean, you see the white collar criminals and the people that commit financial crimes like wire fraud and embezzling and identity theft and things like that. But you also see some of the more low-level gang stalkers committing crimes like burglary and vandalism, of which I did an interview with Fox 45 News about. And you see him committing stuff like catalytic converter theft. All right, a lot of those knuckleheads like to go to places like Home Depot and try and steal lawnmowers and stuff, and some of them go to places like Target or Walmart and try to steal big screen TVs. All right. Stalkers have sort of this way of mimicking one another without trying. It really is disgusting. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I want to talk some about the realization that I've come to about persons that I've known in various capacities over the past 25 years, sort of injecting themselves into sort of my trajectory through time and space using a clandestine monitoring method, something that is definitely a part of clandestine gang stalking campaigns. I don't think that everyone that I've ever known in high school, in college, when I was at church, for example, I went to Shaker Heights High School, then I went to Bearden High School. This was in 2003 and 2002. And then I went to Cuyahoga Community College, and then I started working. Then sometime later, I went back to Cuyahoga Community College, got my associate's degree. Then I transferred my credits to Wright State University, then transferred my credits again to University of Dayton, then was in a car accident and wasn't quite able to apply myself properly to finish my bachelor's degree. And it was at that point that I started investigating gang stalking in depth, to the point where I didn't know if I'd ever finish that bachelor's degree. So, while I was in Dayton, I became a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And it was a very idyllic situation. Like, I could not picture a more pleasurable, more perfect church experience than the one I experienced during my first 6 months or so in the church. Then, some people from Shaker Heights, Ohio, that had known me 15 years prior, found out that I was a member of the church, and they went and plugged in to whatever gang stalkers were in that church, and then the situation started becoming less pleasant. So yes, I experienced gang stalking in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, but only after various parties in Shaker Heights became aware of that. And that was after the 6-month period. I started seeing elements of synchronized activity and disruption that followed me to church every Sunday that I was able to go. And I wasn't about to tell my bishop or my stake president or any of the temple workers or the area 70s or the apostles or the prophet of the church, who was also called the president. And mind you, these are occupational titles, okay? These are not arrogant men, okay? For all the Christians listening that do a double take when I use the word apostle or prophet, okay? These are occupational titles, okay? These men do not hold themselves in the same regard as the apostles of the Bible or the prophets of the Bible. Those are occupational titles that they hold. Now, if the members of the church believe those titles to be literal, well, that's a matter of their own personal beliefs. But those are occupational titles. Okay? So I just want the people listening to understand that and how that plays into these things. Because some people might say, well, if they have apostles and prophets, then how is it possible that one of their members winds up in a clandestine gang stalking campaign? Can't they pray to Jesus and make it stop? But it doesn't work like that. Okay, these are occupational titles, not much different than, say, chairman of the board or board of county commissioners or CEO or vice president or chief operating officer. They're occupational titles that they have. And one might ask oneself, how does a person that's a member of an international conglomerate like the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints become a gang stalking target while a member of the church? That's what I said, ladies and gentlemen, but it is not difficult, because apparently my gang stalking campaign is centered in Shaker Heights, Ohio. That's where it all began. Well, I mean, that's where it intensified. Okay, it intensified in Shaker Heights, Ohio. Shaker Heights is kind of the ground zero of the thing. Even when I was living in Knoxville, Tennessee, and had never lived in Shaker Heights, Ohio, Any gang stalking I experienced in Knoxville, Tennessee was because of gang stalkers in Shaker Heights, Ohio. Shaker Heights, Ohio is ground zero for me. Now, that's not to say anything bad about the city itself, okay? All cities have bad elements in them. Shaker Heights is a historic city, it's a beautiful city, and it is a lovely place to live, ultimately. But, yes, there is gang stalking in Shaker Heights, Ohio. And the root of my gang stalking campaign is in Shaker Heights, Ohio. So if ever I got a job, or if ever I went to school, or if ever I moved out of Shaker Heights, Ohio, at some point my handlers, or the liaisons that handle my gang stalking campaign, became aware of it at some point. How they became liaisons and handlers of my gang stalking campaign, that's all extrajudicial. I obviously made the wrong enemy in Shaker Heights somewhere, and I was reported to someone somewhere in an official capacity as withdrawn or antisocial, or as subversive, or as dangerous, etc., etc., etc. The same whiny bull crap that gang stalkers say about every targeted individual. So when the Shakers found out that I was a member of the Mormon Church, they immediately moved to disrupt my membership, and they were successful. Because I wasn't about to drag the bishop or the stake president or any of the appointed church leaders into this. I wasn't going to tell them, hey, guys, hate to tell you this, but the reason I've missed church for the past 6 months is because I've been experiencing synchronous disruptive activity that I've recently found out has a name. It goes by gang stalking, and I'm presently in the process of documenting it, and I cannot be a member of your church anymore. I just quit going. But I can promise you this: when I left the church, when I formally resigned, and I found a reason, because I needed to be free of the church in order to fight gang stalking. There were a few swarthy cowboy Bible thumping types that didn't like how my trajectory, how my tenure through the Mormon Church went over the 2.5 years that I was a member. And they've shown their ugly heads out here in Florida, a few of them, the ones that don't like me. There were a lot of people in that church that treated me like family and gave me so much love that I didn't know how to repay it back to them. And I think most of the members that fellowshipped with me, invited me into their homes, etc., still wish me well, and I still wish them well. And hopefully they still wish me well, even though I have asserted and still assert that the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints has a gang stalking unit indexed to it. Okay, they as a church, and I'm talking about, I'm not going to say all 15 million members participate, but I'm going to say a good chunk of them do. And many of them who work for the church in an official capacity have basically been plugged into my gang stalking campaign. All right, you'll see that I have a blogspot page dedicated to Mormon history. That is not to insult the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. As I've just pointed out, there are good and bad qualities to every church. Okay? And I think some of the more knuckleheaded members of the church saw my website and they were offended that I accused the church of having a hand in gang stalking, and there are some other articles I've put up that are intentionally inflammatory because, quite frankly, I don't appreciate being the subject of a gang stalking campaign that has religious elements in it. And on all of my blogspot pages, there is a picture of I think it was the flag of West Africa in 1914 And the flag of West Africa in 1914 showed an image of a person with a sword decapitating another person who had no sword. Okay? I put an image of that flag on all of my Blogspot pages with the caption, "The Sayings of Redbeard." Because the Sayings of Redbeard, which is a compilation of Ragnar Redbeard's sayings from his 1896 book, Might is Right, which is essentially a consequentialist, psychological hedonist, survival of the fittest, social Darwinist book that teaches self-preservation as the highest law. That image of the West African flag and Party A eliminating Party B is a prime illustration of some of Redbeard's work. One of they were engaged in a conflict of some kind, and Party A brought a weapon to the conflict and Party B did not. Party A won the conflict by eliminating Party B. That is the essence of the social philosophy that Ragnar Redbeard taught in his book, Might is Right. So that flag and the sayings of Redbeard embossed upon that flag is a very elegant metaphor for protecting oneself at all times. And that's on all of my Blogspot pages, but I think there were some members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and possibly some members of that I knew back 25 years ago at Shaker Heights High School. Some of you have reared your heads up too, popped up wearing wigs and disguises, spying on me from a distance. For what reason, I have no idea. You ain't told me nothing, but I seen you. All right, some of you wearing disguises, some of you riding past me in speeding cars, looking at me and stuff. Some of you done probably hacked me. All right, what the hell? I mean, just think of what you would think, ladies and gentlemen, of people you hadn't seen for 25 years popped up around where you live wearing disguises. Wouldn't you laugh? I had a good laugh at their expense. But I digress. I think some members of the Mormon Church saw that image and got scared. Because mind you, gang stalkers get scared a lot. Okay, gang stalkers get afraid a lot. Okay, gang stalkers are an extremely cowardly lot. That's why a lot of what they do is in cars. They like to target people in vehicles. They're in a 3,000-pound vehicle with the windows up, and you're on foot, and they attempt to use their vehicle as a weapon against you because they were signaled to by another gang stalker, okay? The kind of person who would do that is the kind of person who would become a gang stalker, okay? The kind of person that would break into your home when you're not there, not once, but repeatedly, just to undermine your sense of personal stability. Okay? That's the kind of person that would become a gang stalker. Okay? The kind of person who would contaminate your food at a restaurant. Because mind you, chefs and cooks at restaurants, they take signals too. If they get a signal from a gang stalker to contaminate this plate or that plate of food, these cooks, these dinner preparers that are unseen by the person ordering the food, you typically don't see the person who's preparing your food if you go to a sit-down restaurant. They're somewhere else. But a cook in a restaurant, and it doesn't have to be a sit-down restaurant. It could be a Five Guys Burgers and Fries. It could be a McDonald's. It could be a Burger King. It could be a Wendy's. It could be a Waffle House. A cook can take a signal from a stalker to contaminate your food. And the cook will follow orders to maintain social favor with the signalers. A gang stalker can earn a reputation as a good signal taker. Some do it once and then ride off into the sunset like the Lone Ranger. Others do it over and over and over again to the point where they earn a reputation as a good signal taker. And if someone needs a signal taken to harm another person, they know they can go to that gang stalker there who's done it several times, because that gang stalker has proven to you and others that they know how to take a signal and that they execute it. Okay, cooks will spit, okay, fling eye drops or eye crust in your food. They'll throw earwax in your food. Okay, I've heard of cooks here in South Florida bringing vials of vomit to work and flinging vomit in people's food. I've heard stories of and seen online where cooks have been arrested for putting boogers in people's food. Some cooks put fecal matter in people's food. Some cooks pee in people's food. And their fellow cooks don't report them to the Human Resources Department because they do it too. Some cooks use other disgusting bodily functions to contaminate people's food. All right, some cooks take it a step further. Some cooks bring vials of blood to work, and if they get the signal from some other stalker to contaminate this customer's food or that customer's food, they'll unscrew the top and sling blood in your food. And then stir the food all up so you can't see the blood, and then they'll bring it out to you so watch you eat it. Gang stalkers are a disgusting lot. And they do a lot of disgusting things too, and that's not just here in South Florida. That's in all 50 states, Hawaii and Alaska included. Sometimes restaurant workers, cooks, they just simply don't want this person or that person coming into their diner. But they won't do nothing to the food unless another signaler tells them to. And who tells the signaler to tell the cook to put diarrhea in someone's food? It's going to be a liaison or an undercover. You know why? Because liaisons and undercovers like feeling superior to the law as well. Thank you for tuning in.